This is the reassembly of an AS/ST1803. This family of movements, I think, as far as I can tell, online dates back to 1965. I think this particular style of movement might be closer to 1970. First thing you saw me do was lubricate the area where the barrel arbor drops in. Speaking of dropping in, we're gonna drop in the escape wheel. That was not intended. So I'm a hobbyist, so you may not want to do things the way I do things, but I thought maybe this video might be helpful nonetheless. And since I am a hobbyist, if you see some things that I'm doing wrong or can do better, please let me know. Dropping in these train of wheels. I like to place the wheels and the screws, I kind of like to test fit and then put them in an order in front of me. Just helps me, I don't know, it just feels better doing it that way. I could probably save some time just buttoning it all up during my test fit, but I think I learned a little bit from that process, and it's instead of just kind of trial and error and finally getting it to just go together, I think it helps me understand things just a little bit better. And just a gentle tap here sometimes it helps get things to fall into place. You know, one thing with this movement, I've noticed the bridges and the cocks, they have these studs on the bottom side that kind of fit in these holes on the movement, and man, they are tight. So you can tell when you pry it off, when you disassemble the movement, that they're tight. So you kind of know getting them back on, they're going to be kind of tight. You have to be really careful to not, to make sure those pivots are in the right place, and when you're putting that pressure on to get those bridges into place, that you're not going to damage those pivots. So you'll see me kind of poke and prod and gently press and check. Generally, if your parts aren't moving when your bridge is partially on, there's a problem. You probably shouldn't proceed too far. At least you want to do it very carefully, because you can kind of have a bridge that's maybe just needs to be tightened down all the way. But what you don't want to do is just blindly go in thinking, oh, it just needs to be tightened, and well, then you crush a pivot because you weren't careful. Just a little bit of oil here on the seconds hand. Not the seconds hand, but obviously the shaft of that seconds wheel. It's kind of a basic movement, but I think it's an attractive movement. Trying to nudge the bridge, align the bridge with the screw holes here, and partially dropped into place. Again, now this is one of those bridges where with those studs underneath, alignment studs, man, they are tight, and it does require a little bit of pressure, and I don't know what the best way is. I just try to try to get the wheels in there, the pivots all aligned, see if they'll maybe turn a little bit. Kind of start the screws just a hair, and just sort of gently walk your way toward getting that bridge down. Man, sometimes, man, these bridges will just drop into place, and it's just amazingly. It's a beautiful sight when they just drop into place and everything works. But when they don't, they can be absolutely horrendous and frustrating if you let it. So really, it's best just to approach it with that in mind, that it might take a while. As a matter of fact, this bridge was about as difficult as I've had. As a matter of fact, I will, at some point, I will speed up the video, and you'll see me poke, prod, tighten, loosen, check. Yeah, speaking of checking those wheels, and clearly it was jammed up. Things were not aligned. So loosening the screw, pull the bridge up a little bit, and see if we can figure out, get this pivots in there. A little tap again to see if those pivots will fall into place. Press the bridge back down. Check again, and no go. So here we go. And this went on for many, 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 many minutes. And then finally, eventually, you'll see me check the wheels, and you'll see that they spin freely. You just got to be patient. And sometimes, frankly, it is easier. Just take the bridge off entirely and start over. That's me checking the pivot one last time, and voila. You can see those wheels turning when I move the barrel with the piece of pegwood there. And then we'll do the circuit of tightening down these screws, and you don't need to tighten these down. You don't really have to crank them down, but you want them snug. And bear in mind, when you make your way tightening these down one by one, there can be some shifting, so it does not hurt to recheck. I love watching those wheels turn, especially after having such a hard time like on that bridge. And that's just me checking those screws just to be sure I didn't mess something up, leave something loose. You know, this is not my job, and so I'm doing this after hours. And after a long day, some maybe obviously increases the chances for a chance of error. Putting a little lubrication here with this little ring you'll see in the center lower part of my screen. Picking it up right now. Gonna drop that over that post. That ring goes in the center of the ratchet wheel there. And we'll sort of nudge that over with my oiler. And we'll drop this wheel over. And now we'll oil where the arbor comes through there. Sort of like that capillary action, pull that in. Now I didn't put the screws into these wheels yet because this this wheel over the arbor here has to kind of snap into a notch, and it's just a little easier, I find, when neither one are screwed down. Now you can put the screws in partially. You might have enough experience doing this to know that sometimes both these screws can be reverse threaded. So you want to take note when you disassemble. Usually, or not usually, but sometimes these reverse thread screws are marked with like the triple horizontal slots. This one is not reverse threaded. And we have a runaway screwdriver. That's probably bad practice to let that to put that screwdriver there and let it roll across the table like that. And this one is reverse threaded. I like to rotate my screws to about a quarter turn in the reverse direction, just to kind of make sure they're not misaligned in the threads. Just a little precaution. I was using that pickwood there to kind of hold that, keep that wheel from rotating as I was tightening. I just really like the look of this movement. Too bad it's not a display case back. It's just a manual wind movement, not an automatic. Flip this over to the dial side. Grease up the sliding pinion and the little wheel here that goes over the stem. That doesn't go like that. There we go. Now this is really sloppy form, but I greased up these wheels, and bear in mind now that your tweezers are contaminated, so I do wipe them down, but I just cautionary tale. And we'll lubricate the stem. And that hair doesn't belong there. I have two cats, Charles and Dodger. They are brothers by birth. I think they're about 14 years old now. Tighten up the setting lever screw to hold the stem in. Clean up a little bit of mess here with my Rodico. Down below you can see my parts I've laid out. Kind of in order. That spring is gonna be a beast. They're probably not as bad as we make them out to be. They can be difficult to get on. They can be difficult to get off. But on top of the difficulty, they can be very easy to lose. Those things will catapult many feet. I've lost some, never to be recovered. Sometimes you'll just remove a cover and, unprovoked, the springs will just fly off. So you have to really keep that in mind when you're disassembling a watch. Some people will place a movement inside a bag to keep that from happening. And we'll get this little spring in this little nook, and holding it down with the pegwood, I'll slip that long end into place. Now this little piece is the reason why our hands would not turn, even though the watch seemed to run very well according to the time grapher. The hands would turn and then not turn. So I've got this on a little brooch and got some old nail clippers that I've sort of dulled the edges down. I'm gonna pinch on this. This is a gear with kind of a neck. It's like a Canon pinion. I don't know if technically is a Canon pinion, but this isn't a Canon pinion in the traditional sense that it's in that center of the movement. This is offset, and it needs a little friction. And this did not have enough friction, and so the watch would run and the hands would not spin. And you can see the post that slides over right there. And you press that down just like you would a Canon pinion. You can even feel a little snap and hear it. And get our driving wheel in there. And our cover back in there. One thing to note is to not tighten the screw all the way down yet until you have this little spring arm on this cover that snaps around the post on the setting lever. So just screw it down partially. And then manipulate that spring arm back behind that post on the setting lever. And once you've got it in place, you just go ahead and tighten it all the way down. Check the operation here. You can hear the gear train whirring. And that's what a traditional Canon pinion looks like, but there's no friction. It just slides over the center post there. And we'll lubricate that little spot where this wheel goes in. It's just kind of slides into kind of between there's a little spring there, kind of slides under tension on, just kind of hold it in place, it seems. Get our dial washer onto our hour wheel. Now this hour wheel doesn't go on just yet, but I just want to check its operation a little bit. So we'll get in here and mesh the teeth, make sure they're, there we go. Just make sure it's working. And that'll come off so that we can get this cover on, which goes on before the hour wheel. What you don't see in the editing in my videos or anyone else's is when we push a screw around for 30 seconds because we can't get our tweezer work on par. Sometimes you just get tired, or maybe your tweezers get a little worn, they need to be redressed. Alright, here we're back over on the train side and just putting a little oil on the pallet fork, on the pallet stone of the pallet fork. That's the exit stone that I put a little oil on, and this will just get us started in lubricating the escapement. Again, another one of these little bridges with those kind of has pegs and slots, and it fits kind of tightly, and just got to be careful. Just really careful trying to align this, because certainly didn't want to damage the pivots on the pallet fork trying to get this bridge on. Not at this point, because we're almost done. So I'm trying to be really careful pressing it down, getting it into place, and I will check the motion of the pallet fork as I'm tightening this down. Make sure it's not bound up. Oh yeah, great. So we were at a point where if that screw doesn't come out, I might have to take this thing mostly apart again. I can just make that screw out, but I don't think the tweezers are going to work. That was lucky. Okay, deep breath and onward. We are nearly done. Just gently checking the pallet fork. It is moving, so we're not bound up, so we're going to get this screw in here, and we'll sort of incrementally tighten. Once I feel the first bit of resistance, I'll actually back it off a little bit often, and check the motion of the parts to make sure they're not bound up. Now you'll notice a jump in the time here because the camera died. So we did get the pallet fork bridge screwed in and secured without too much drama, and it did take me a little while to get the balance wheel pivots into place, and so now I'm sort of gently tightening down this bridge because this cock, the balance cock, because I'm not certain. I can see the pivot in there, but I just every so often the balance wheel would stop moving. That puts me on edge. So I was pretty careful. I would sort of tighten. When it would stop, I'd back off sort of manipulate it around, make sure things were okay. So, but we're rolling. Now we're gonna gently open up this the spring, this retaining spring here for the jewel, and lift that out of the way. And with a little bit of Rodico, gonna lift this jewel. Now it should be clean, but often I will go ahead and clean it with a little bit of alcohol. Then put a little droplet of oil, and then one key thing here is that people often, from what my understanding is, they worry about more how much oil than consistency. I understand that it's more important to have the same amounts of oil, whether it's too little than the maximum allowed, than it is to have the maximum allowed. Basically, if you have more oil on one side than the other, that apparently causes problems with how it runs in different positions, and we're gonna. That was often easier than it usually is, frankly. Nudge this little just to get it into place, and we'll close up this little retaining spring here. I have broken some of these little springs. I've had them also become dislodged and fly off. So I still get a little anxious with these. I have a Seiko movement that's been in a box for several months now because it uses a different kind of spring, similar in theory or in function, but this spring, well, it needs another one. I'm just checking the pivot there. And back to the dial side, we're going to get the other side of the balance wheel. I know when I first started, I tried to cheat and not mess with these little springs, and I would just try and, I don't know, put a blob of oil, through one side or the other, or oil the tip of the pivot, or whatever I could do to sort of make me feel better about not opening up these springs and doing it more properly. But this really isn't that bad. These springs are actually pretty nice to work with. And we're going to drop this back in. Well, let's not say drop. Let's place. I know some people use automatic oilers, I think, that can... and there's debate about that, whether it's a good practice or not. Some people have a cat whisker trick, and some people use kind of make homemade oilers with old pivots that will fit in these stones where you don't have to. These aren't the worst to deal with, though. There's some that are much worse, and I can understand those other methods for those. And now we can get our hour wheel back on. loosening up our dial screws so that we can get the dial on. I tighten these down when I put them in the watch cleaner. I don't have a watch cleaner, actually. It's my watch cleaner. It's an ultrasonic cleaner. So I'm very, very basic when it comes to my watch servicing setup. I actually used to clean movements by hand. The ultrasonic cleaner is nice. Get this dial on here. I like this dial. It's in really good shape too. Tighten these dial screws back. Ugh. Clean up. I'm so stoked about getting this watch back together. I used to wear this watch quite a bit, actually. And then it kind of became unreliable. I really didn't know exactly why. I just would see the time was off. So I didn't know if it's, the movement had stopped, or then finally I had to set up a time lapse, and I discovered that the hands would just totally stop. Sometimes they would re-engage, sometimes they wouldn't. And our hand. I don't know why I'm fiddling with this. I just need it on there. It doesn't have to be aligned with anything, but it just makes me feel a little better, I guess. Gentle press. Check for any kind of interference. And now the minute hand. Which does need to be a little better aligned. Just soft press, not all the way, and get it aligned. I don't have the steadiest hands, so I try to do whatever I can to stabilize myself. Sometimes I'll use two hands. I know the watch is already running, but there's just something about when you get a second hand on there. It's a little bit like seeing that balance wheel bounce to life or swing to life. Let's make sure there's no interference here. It's a strange thing. I've actually run, check the hands with the second hand before, all the way around the dial. And let it run overnight, and even the next day there'd be the watch will have stopped because there was a clearance issue. So we'll need to get that stem out so we can get this cased up. I think this is a good looking little watch. I'm not crazy about this bracelet I have on here. It's a little, well, the proportions I don't feel like are quite right. I don't know. I've had straps on here, but I guess I just wanted to try this bracelet for a little while, and that's what's on here now. But I don't know what color strap, or what kind of bracelet or strap, or do you think would look best with this? I was kind of thinking maybe like a Epsom kind of dark gray. I mean, black would be an obvious choice, but I don't want to be too dressy with it, so nothing like alligator skin or lizard skin necessarily, but I guess Epsom's kind of dressy, but I don't know. Clearly, if I knew what I wanted, I'd have it on here, I guess. I see some marks here. I just want to get off before I close it up. I don't have a gasket yet, so that's going to be ordered. But not that I would think this will be watertight, but hey, every little bit might make a difference. And after a little more than 24 hours of run time, we are ready to put this thing on the time grapher to see what we've done. And not bad, decent amplitude considering it's an old mainspring, and I'll take plus or minus 1 second a day. The beat error isn't bad, but sometimes that can be tweaked just a little more. But we'll let this run a few days and come back and see what we've got then. Well, I think that's going to be it for this video. We'll wrap it up with some beauty shots of this little watch. You probably saw that Elgin had its own branding as the Elgin 960 on this movement. It is, if not similar, then it would be identical to the AS/ST 1802 and 1803. I hope this video was helpful, and I hope to see you in another video soon. Until then, be well.